Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
How many sleeps till you come and see me in London, Steph?
59, maybe. That's a guess.
It's not a bad guess. It's going to be pretty close by the time the podcast comes out. At the end of January, if you haven't heard us going on about this already, on Saturday, the 28th of January, me and Steph are going to be together in London and we want you to join us.
We're having a day-long workshop and live podcast recording and just a chance to kind of just meet each other and be with other people that get it.
Yeah.
We'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who wants to get tickets to that.
This is our first in-person event together.
Yeah.
And the next one, we're going to do a week in Tuscany. Is that right?
I love that you just say it. Yeah, we're hoping to, it'll only get better from here.
Exactly.
We're excited. We're very excited about hosting this and meeting some of you.
So speaking of getting together and having a good time.
Today we're talking about how to navigate festivities.
Yeah.
Or as in the US we say, the holidays.
Yes.
Holiday festivities. With food and body image and all of the things that come up during this particular time of year. I mean, it's relevant all the time, I think, but it's always a pretty big theme during the month of December.
It's that time of year when there's a lot more socializing, a lot more pressure to socialize. You might have office parties, family gatherings, socializing with friends. And that often revolves around food. And if you live in the UK, usually alcohol as well.
Well, here too. Alcohol is a big part of things here. I mean, yeah. It's not absent.
I always hear how the Americans look at us Brits and go, really? When it comes to how much we drink?
Well, I think that's more on a daily, but holiday time for sure.
So it's more like the binge restrict mentality for you guys then, because you go all year not drinking that much. And so you have to make up for it the holiday time.
I think that's really interesting that you think we don't drink that much. I mean, I think there's alcohol at every party. I mean, generally, unless it's specifically not for that. But yeah, I mean, it's present.
Yeah.
Just maybe not as day to day for us.
Well, also, I think America's so big. Everything is so spaced out. You're not likely to be somewhere where you can just walk home, are you?
Yeah. No, typically not unless you're in a city. But yeah, alcohol for me was, I mean, was a binge trigger 100%. I mean, and the holidays were. I mean, there's a lot of triggers coming together at this particular time of year, which is why we're having an episode about this.
Mm-hmm.
How did you navigate it during a time when it was more difficult for you? And how do you navigate it now?
Well, now I'm self-employed, so I don't have the whole work parties thing. I have a couple of groups of friends that will make sure we get together, we'll have a gathering and do something. So I think my socializing now around Christmas time is socializing with people I'm really choosing to spend time with. There isn't that same, isn't it strange how there's like less social pressure with people you care about, and the ones that you don't care about so much what they think, you feel more pressure.
Yes. Sometimes I feel like there's less choice when you aren't self-employed, right? Like you have to attend this work party. Like it's something you have to do. But I think in general, we have a tendency as humans to feel like we have to attend everything, or say yes to everything. Unless there is a work obligation, we don't necessarily have to say yes to every single thing we're invited to at this time of year. And I think it's important to say that first. Like, what do you really want to attend?
Yeah. But Steph, when I was working with other people, I was usually the organizer.
Oh, yeah?
So, yeah. Yeah. So I looked forward to the Christmas parties.
Yeah.
Even when I was struggling with food. And I can remember one year, a few weeks before the Christmas party, started eating paleo, as they would say back then. I don't even know. I don't hear them talking about paleo.
Yeah, it's less popular. I read that in an article actually recently. I was like, oh, I didn't realize it was less popular, but apparently it is.
It's going out of fashion. Well, it was paleo back then. So I had been eating paleo for a few weeks and extremely proud of myself. And we were going out for our office Christmas party. And I remember saying I wasn't going to drink alcohol because alcohols are not really paleo, not in the kind of quantities that would, not cocktails anyway. Maybe they probably get around it with red wine or something like that being paleo. And I remember when I announced that I wasn't going to drink, getting a really hard time of people. And I remember one guy in particular who was kind of sulky about it, kind of thought that it was almost like it unbalanced something. If there's a
Mm.
sober person there and everyone else is going to get trashed, then I think people who want to get at it and get pissed are self-conscious about perhaps being judged by the sober person who's looking at you going, all right.
Or like the buzzkill,
Yeah.
literally. But it's
Yeah.
so interesting that we're talking about this as if there's only two choices. Why is it either you abstain or you get pissed? Pissed?
Yeah.
Pissed to me is angry.
I know.
But,
I always, well, welcome to the UK, Steph.
I better get used to it.
That is. And this was when I was in the police as well. So that night, in the end, I went out and I had that, oh, stuff it moment. So I decided to drink and I drank and had a great night. And I never got back on the paleo wagon after that.
Ah,
And always blamed that night for ruining everything. So to me, there was this frustration that this event had happened at this particular time and it had ruined everything. And I
ah.
blamed the timing and the party and all of that. So if I was going to find socializing tricky, it was normally because I was on some kind of kick and I felt like it was going to ruin something.
So much black and white thinking in this episode so far. I think about alcohol. Like when I think about holiday parties and alcohol, my mind goes back to when I was working at a time when I did not. Oh gosh, I'm an introvert too. So I would have never been organizing anything. I would have been like attending because I had to. And so I would turn to alcohol to help me through an evening where I was otherwise not feeling very confident in myself, or just having that sort of like lack of ease. And when you combine that with lack of ease of self in general, because that's what comes up for me, is this like when I was in the heart of my disorder, there was so much disconnection with myself. And I would use alcohol the way I would use food. So it was all or nothing. And it wasn't that it was a choice to be all or nothing. It would just happen that way because I was so anxious that I would just start drinking and be like, okay, keep that coming because I'm able to speak to people when I'm drinking. And then I would have the hangover I'd had the next day would be of food, alcohol, and self, like the vulnerability hangover and this idea of, oh my gosh, who was I last night? That was huge with me in alcohol. And I think that all of those things together are just, it epitomizes to me what that feeling is of I'm so out of touch with my body, with myself, and with my food. Um, and then you just have a big headache all on top of it. And it would just feel like the biggest, like, I hate this. It's just such a reinforcement of all of that.
Mhm.
And yeah, that it would just catapult a binge streak.
It's interesting, this idea of an obligation, because I think with anything like that, some kind of Christmas party, I just would never experience it as an obligation. I normally wanted to go. And you said something then about disconnection. I think for me to not go, because I wasn't feeling great would be the disconnecting experience.
Mm.
And for me with alcohol, I don't really change. I don't really behave any differently to how I would without it. And I've never been the kind, well, apart from once or twice as a teenager, but the kind done the kind of drinking where I don't remember something or where I say something that I later regret.
Uh, I love that we have different experiences. This is going to be helpful for many people who will relate to either one of us. Oh, no, that was not me. No, no, no. Oh, no, no, no. Maybe now. I mean, I think now when I drink, in fact, I just went to my first holiday party was on Halloween. It was a neighborhood event and there was drinking. And I mean, the way that alcohol and I have a relationship now has actually healed alongside of my food without intention. Alcohol was never a vulnerable point for me per se, but I certainly used to use it the same way I used food to disconnect from myself, to survive in certain situations. And I've noticed that since healing my relationship with food and myself, I think there's been less of a need to rely on it. So I'm able to be in that gray area. And so my behavior with alcohol is not what it was. I'm not reaching that point where I've overused it and then I'm becoming, although I have the potential to do that. But at the time, for most of my life, drinking was disconnecting ultimately if I overused it. And I didn't feel comfortable. A lot of things were obligations. So to me, I didn't want to go to a lot of things because it just invited more of this disconnection.
Yeah. I think I always felt more connected to myself through alcohol. And interestingly, though, since coming back from that retreat at the beginning of September, my desire for alcohol just isn't there. And so I'm not labeling it as whether I drink or not, but at the moment I have pretty much zero desire to drink. And I think I possibly won't anymore. I don't know. Maybe I'll have a one drink or something like that. But the idea of going and drinking, what it was, the most appealing thing to me about alcohol was the energy that it gave me. So if I wasn't drinking, I'm ready to go home at 9:30, 10 o'clock. If I was drinking, I could stay up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and dance and feel like I had all this energy. So it felt like a sacrifice to give that up because I'd previously toyed with the idea of whether it might be more useful to me to give it up, but the consequences weren't bad enough. And then I realized one thing. I realized that it isn't that alcohol gives me energy, but it allows me to borrow energy from the next day. So although I wouldn't really suffer with hangovers, I would be exhausted. The day after a night out, I don't have energy for anything. So it was almost like making a withdrawal early of energy that I then had to pay back. And when I realized that, it took something away from me. It unhooked another piece for me with alcohol where I kind of thought, I'm not really sure what I'm getting from
Mm.
consuming this at the moment.
Did you ever, though, have less inhibition with food because of alcohol? And did that affect your binges? Because to me, that was huge.
There was two phases with it. There was a phase when it really did, especially at the beginning. I can remember coming home from being out the pub with colleagues, and I would get home and then I would eat like 5 bowls of porridge in one go because I didn't normally have much else in. I can remember drinking, coming home, eating a lot of porridge. And that was something that I probably went through that stage for a few years. And then I went through this stage where I didn't really want to eat afterwards. And
Mm.
whereas previously, before food was even a problem, it might be I'd have a few drinks and at the end of the night, I wanted something to eat. It was almost like, I actually feel really connected and I feel really good because of the alcohol. And now I don't need the food. So when the food was more of an emotional thing, the alcohol didn't trigger it. When it was that real visceral, when I was getting up in the middle of the night, eating and eating and eating, then it would trigger off more eating. And I'd never thought about it.
Mm.
Like, till you asked the question, I realized that there was 2 different stages of it.
It's interesting to see that there's alcohol can be productive in some ways. And I can agree with that too. I think it can be connecting now. But where's our threshold? Where's each person's individual threshold of what enough alcohol is to the point where it's helping support, maybe taking the edge off a little bit or connecting to oneself, allowing like less feelings of insecurity, which then can pave the way to feeling more connected with others. But then there's this crossing, I think, of now I'm abusing it. And I think it's the same with food, right? There's still this threshold idea. And I think like that is a question perhaps to pay attention to during this time of when does it help and where's the threshold of that? When am I crossing over? It can be a cool experiment. In fact, this happened to me. My husband's birthday was a couple days ago. We went out with friends and I had a drink and I was feeling good. I was feeling like, yay. And I remember that the waiter came over and said, would you like another? And impulsively I was like, yeah, bring me more, bring me 2 more. And then I was like, no, 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 you are good. Like you're at your threshold. I've been paying attention to that for a while. And I'm like, no, you're there, you're there. And I heard myself say, no, thank you. And I was so glad because I was able to maintain that space. But knowing that it's hard to know that. And I think it's a practice.
Is rounds something that you guys do much in America if you go out to drink? If you get rounds in, does that mean anything to you?
Well, like another round kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
another round, a round of drinks for everyone kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it was a very common when I used to go out in my police days with everybody that everyone would put in money into like a kitty and then rounds would be brought with that. So you don't get to choose the pace of the drinking. If most people are
Oh.
finished and certainly whoever's holding the kitty is ready, another round of drinks comes. I got to the point where I was like, I'm just happy to miss out on a round because I actually want to enjoy this experience. And if I'm being forced to drink faster than I even want to, then I'm not going to enjoy that.
Hmm.
But for years, I have had that voice in my head that goes, I can have a few drinks and then goes, now you need to stop. And my friends used to be baffled by it. I don't know where it came from because
Hmm.
it feels against my personality. But probably since I'm about 18 or 19 years old, That's the voice. And I think it's probably because I had an incident when I was 14 that taught me a lesson.
Really? Can you share it?
Yeah. Well, it's
Okay.
fun. It made me think of it when you said about being in the restaurant and they came and asked if you wanted another drink. You're like, yeah, give me more. So it was my friend's 15th birthday, and we decided to go down Bournemouth Gardens, just drink it because we're too young to go in any bars or anywhere. So we would hang out outside the offie, ask random strangers to go in and buy us alcohol. And I tell you, Steph, we never had to ask more than 2 or 3 people before somebody would agree to go in and buy a load of kids alcohol.
Well, you don't have a limit, an age limit.
Yeah, we do, 18. That's why we'd have to ask adults.
And they would do it?
Yeah.
Wow. That's
And you didn't even have to ask. You'd get a few people that would say no, but it wouldn't take long for somebody to say yes. Like, who
wow.
are these people? I would
Wow.
never do that. So I think there was 4 of us maybe, and we got some. Have you ever heard of 2020?
Except COVID year. No.
No, it's like a liqueur called
Oh,
2020,
no,
and
no.
they had like watermelon flavor and lime flavor, but it's quite strong. It's 20% proof, but it's stronger than wine. We had that. We also had this bottle of Thunderbirds. Some people in the UK are going to be having flashbacks to this stuff back then. And I think you might have had a few Bacardi breezes. Were they ever a thing?
Yes.
And I can remember us walking through Bournemouth Gardens, and my friend whose birthday it was, her 15th birthday, one of my last memories of that night before I blacked out was her walking along and drinking out of this Thunderbirds bottle with tears running down her face because she was crying over some boy. I can't remember the details. And I can remember when I was drinking thinking, I really like this feeling and I want this feeling to last.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
remember that thought. So in my drunken haze, I thought the way to make the feeling last was to keep drinking, not really realizing the accumulative effect of that.
Yes. I think this is common.
The next thing I'm aware of is I open my eyes and I know straight away I'm in a hospital because just know what hospitals look like. And my mum is stood over my bed. And I have a moment where I'm racking my brains because I have no idea why I'm in hospital, why I'm lying in a hospital bed. I remember trying to think if I'd had an operation. I was trying to And I remember saying to my mum, I said, why am I here? She said to me, the police brought you in last night, stone drunk. That's her exact words. And I remember the look on her face. And when you get in trouble, maybe you're too conscientious to ever have got in real trouble, but that sinking
I did
feeling
once. I did once.
in my stomach. And then I had to pull the covers back to realize I didn't have any shoes. I was in so much trouble.
So now you've got a voice. That did
Now
you
I
good.
have a voice that goes, you feel good, now stop.
Yeah.
Stay
Okay.
here. It goes, stay here.
Yeah.
I'd love to try and tie that birthday party to Christmas and holidays, but it was February, so I can't.
Yeah. Well, there's so many parallels to food here too, because I think that exactly this idea of this feels good, I want to stay here. It's sort of like, how do I make this last? And if there's restriction happening, right? That's part of why alcohol is very difficult for people who are in a diet cycle, because there is this opportunity to eat and the body's responding to that. Like, yay, food, we're getting to eat the things we're not allowed to eat. Psychologically and physiologically, there's reward. And so we want to then stay there. And while we're drinking, there's less, like, oh no, we shouldn't do that. There's more like, yeah, heck yeah, this feels good. Like, let's keep going with that. And I think sometimes actually I remember using drinking as like, oh, like good, I can eat. In the back of my mind, I knew I would give myself permission to eat when I was drinking. So as much as my conscious mind would be like, no eating tonight, be good. In the back of my mind, I think there was like a part of me that was like, yes, like I know I'm going to get the stuff I don't normally get. And I think I would keep drinking for that reason, because if I had stayed too sober, I wouldn't have allowed that to happen.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
I'm also thinking in terms of parties and what to wear. As my mind goes back over different Christmas parties that I've been to, I think generally I would find something that I thought looked okay. And then I would see photographs later and I would be, what were you thinking? Because what I saw when I put that on and looked in the mirror and then what I would see in a photograph, just looked very different. And I've often had that, and I still sometimes experience that now in terms of what I see in the mirror and then what I see on camera
Yeah.
or in a photograph. So I remember that was always quite jarring, and that would be a next day experience. And of course, the pictures are going up on Facebook then, and I'd be untagging myself from pictures that I didn't think was flattering.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I tended to be able to find something I liked, but it would just be a real disconnect to what I would see in photographs and what I would see before I left the house.
Yeah. I think that's true all year round sometimes. Um, but for me, that was part of why I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go to these parties because it required of me to have to move out of my comfort zone of clothes because it was more of an event and I didn't have I didn't have maybe anything at certain times where it was inappropriate or it meant I would have to go shopping essentially. Or I would have to put on what did feel comfortable, which I didn't really like. So then I felt like kind of like my clothes don't match who I am. I felt so yucky about the whole thing. That was a reason why I'd be like, I'd just rather not go, which is why I would prefer to just hang out with friends where this is a non-issue. But with work parties, there was a lot more pressure to look a certain way and have a certain type of clothing, and then that was very uncomfortable. And I think, especially if I mean, this is uncomfortable, I think, all the way around. But if you're in a recovery as well, or if you're gaining weight, or if you've recently gained weight, there's that layer on top of it. It's just like now I really do have to go shopping because I don't have anything that fits anymore. And what are people going to say? Now people are seeing me that maybe haven't seen me in a while, or it's family members who are more likely to say things to me or just to notice. And I know they're noticing. I think that can be why this time of year is very difficult to show up socially. How do you handle stuff like that?
I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask because when I'm in a social situation, that's when I feel often my most comfortable. Like I feel less comfortable afterwards when I'm looking at a photo and I'm on my own. I think at the time I would see it and I would not feel great and then I would probably go and eat. That's how I would have coped with it. I'd have gone and eaten.
Okay.
I
I
would
think
have,
people relate.
yeah, and I would have looked at that and I would have said, right, okay, stop messing about now, Sarah. You need to take this seriously. You need to start, you know, pull yourself together, eat less, all of that kind of thing, I think would come in and invariably end up in more binging.
Isn't that interesting? Why? Right? I mean, I'm not
Mm.
asking because I did the same thing, but why is it so more common than not that we see the photo, we get upset about it, we say, okay, we really have to be serious now, and then do the very opposite?
Mhm. I think I was setting myself up for restriction. So that would always happen. I'd be setting unrealistic expectations. So the minute I breach them, the all or nothing Last Supper eating would come on. Yeah, that was probably a big part of it. And also, I think when it's driven from a place of I'm not okay, I think to do anything with that kind of sustainable momentum, hoping that it's somehow going to make you feel okay, is this self-defeating cycle. You never get the feeling that you're chasing when it comes from that place anyway. So all it took for me was a moment of despair, and then I would be like,
Yeah.
forget it. I'm just going to lose myself in the food and maybe I'll try again later.
I think that's maybe one reason why this time of year is harder for people who are working on these things because there's so much opportunity for that, for the photographs, for the clothing triggers, for the social triggers, for the alcohol triggers to bring back up those feelings of I need to fix myself. I think this is a high pressure time of year and it's highly vulnerable.
Do you relate to this? And my suspicion is that it may not have been like this for you. I found so let's take something like a party where there's more food than usual, where people are indulging in food. That if I was in that situation and everybody else was doing it and it was just part of what was expected, it was kind of okay for me because it just felt like, well, this is probably normal if everyone's doing it. And all the compulsive eating I was doing outside of that, that was the not normal stuff. So even though I was maybe eating more than I wanted, and even then still might feel uncomfortably full, if I was doing it with people, it wasn't as bad.
I relate to that more in the later part of I can relate to that in some ways, but for most of the time it was actually when other people were doing more indulging, quote unquote. I used that as like I don't do that. And so it would be so much easier to restrict in the presence of others. And when the temptations were right in front of me, sort of saying like, it was kind of a badge of honor. I'd be like, I don't have to. And I would not eat at all during a party. And then I would come home and eat twice as much and the next day as well. And that was a huge pattern for me. So to me, I used it in the opposite way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How did people respond to you? Did they say things? What was the reaction from others that you weren't eating, which they noticed?
Most people didn't notice because I would still carry a plate around, and I made it look like I was eating. So I never felt like it was something that I was ever accused of not, because it wasn't like, usually these things aren't sit down meals. It's more of like appetizers or hors d'oeuvres. You're just sort of like buffet style. You're just kind of eating and meandering. So and plus the fact that, to be honest, I feel like a lot of women do that. So it was kind of normal too. You know what I mean? I was always paying attention to what other people were doing, and I would be like, there's nothing, other people are just having a pepper stick, or like a grape tomato.
Were you ever in a party situation where it was a 3-course meal, where it wasn't buffet style and that was that pressure on you to eat when you were trying not to?
Yes, mostly at family functions. And depending when this was, I mean, there were times where I just learned to hide it, just push food around my plate. There were other times where I would eat, but only like half of everything. And I would just get around it that way. Or I would make my own. We have a lot of Italian traditions during the holidays. We have this big pasta dinner on Christmas Eve with this fish sauce. It's my favorite thing. I love it. And I would just have zucchini noodles with a tad bit of the sauce on top. And that's when my family just kind of got to know. Like, they was like, yeah, that's what Steph does. So I didn't even necessarily hide it from them. But I was never really in a situation where there were other people watching. And if there were, and I really didn't want to eat, I didn't care. I just sort of I was like, I'm doing what I want to do. And then I would always binge after, always, which kind of brings me to the next piece. Like, considering all these conversations, what tips do we have, or would you offer to someone moving through this season and having difficulties in these areas? What are some takeaways for handling this and the vulnerabilities of this time of year?
That's a good question, Steph. The first thing that's coming to mind is this idea of people pleasing and what we're doing for the expectations of others, which is why it's interesting to hear you in your mindset at the time, where you were thinking, well, if I don't want it, no one's gonna be able to make me eat it, and I just won't have it. I meet many people for whom they might want to be able to do that, but that never really feels like an option. And I'm not saying that it is a healthy option for people
Yeah.
generally to do
Well,
that.
it's the people pleaser versus the rebel. I think it depends on where you are.
Yeah. And to feel like to me, it's just an extraordinary setup that people are put in this position where they feel like they have to go and have fun, and it's not a choice. And there's a pressure to have fun. And now that doesn't feel fun anymore because there's a pressure. I would urge, first of all, just from the practical point of view of, is there really an obligation here? For me, sometimes I didn't feel like going, but if I made myself go, I would have a good time. That's not the case for everybody. And so urging the listener to think, what's your pattern? Is it normally a case you might force yourself to go and you rarely have a good time? In which case, can you make it shorter? Are there ways that you can look after yourself? It's almost like the more pressure you put on yourself, and if food's difficult, food might be a way of trying to soothe themselves and to disconnect from themselves or connect to people or whatever it might be. We might use food in ways that don't necessarily feel joyful or part of the celebration part.
I think you bring up a good point, not even just as far as attending or not, but eating or not, like where there's a lot of food pushing potentially during this time of year, that if you are someone who has trouble honoring boundaries of no, um, provided it's not coming from that disordered place that I just mentioned, that there is like the watching the people pleasing around. Do I feel like I have to take food even where I don't want it? I really don't want it. Or alcohol, or timing. Like you said, a tool that I use often is I will attend and I'm giving myself a 2-hour out. Like, I'll stay for a couple of hours and I sort of tell the host, if I need to, we have to leave at such and such time, because I will burn out. And there's a lot of times where I feel like if I could go for a couple of hours, I'm good. But if I have to go and stay for like 4 or 5 hours, then and so I give myself that out.
One thing that really helped me, particularly when I was working through the food freedom thing, was before events like this, asking myself, what do I want it to look like with food? How do I want to feel? How do I want to be thinking about it? What sort of decisions do I want to make? And if this is coming from the diet mentality place, that's going to look very different than when it was for me about wanting to feel comfortable, wanting to really enjoy it as well without that sense of stress. Where I would usually land with this was I want to really enjoy the food. I want to choose foods that I like the taste of, and I want to get to a sense of comfortable satiety. And when I kept that in mind, I didn't have to get tied up in, oh, how much have I eaten and how much should I eat and how much is everybody else eating? Because I would just keep coming back to, no, 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 what am I enjoying? Am I enjoying this? How do I want to feel? And I would just keep bringing myself back to that, not just at parties with food more generally, but sometimes if there was a big event that I was feeling stressed out about. Because buffets would do that. If it was just meals presented to me, I was like, okay, this is what a portion is, and I wouldn't necessarily think about it. But buffets could be quite stressful.
Yeah. Also, I think not restricting or trying to lose weight in extreme ways leading up to events. I mean, it feels almost so well known that I wouldn't say it, but I think that this time of year there is this pressure of I need to lose a certain amount of weight because all this food's coming around, or I need to restrict my food because there's going to be so much to indulge in during there's such a restriction mindset that comes up. And I think that is a huge precursor to binges and to body image spirals and things like that. I think managing the expectations of what this year is supposed to look like in terms of your food and your body can change the entire dynamic of the season.
Yes. Or this was more, this was closer to how I would have done it. In the new year, everything's going to change. So
Yeah.
now I have a few weeks of Last Supper eating, get it out of my system, eat to the point where I'm fed up with all these foods so that I never want to eat them again.
Yeah. Yeah. So either pre-restricting or post-restricting, like the future restriction. Or so either way, the restriction breeds more of what we're not looking for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, and it's been said on this podcast before, of the importance of wearing things that we feel comfortable in, that actually fit. And something I do if I don't have anything that is already in my closet, or if I can't, like, what am I going to wear to this thing? I look for inspiration online or on social media of people that kind of have my body type and I mean, there's a lot of influencers out there who are body positive, body neutral, who are fashion influencers. And I look to that to see, like, okay, what do I want to wear this year? What's the vibe I'm going for? What's the energy I'm going for? What are the colors I want? How do I want to put this together? How are other people doing that? And then in my mind's eye, I'm seeing their bodies, which is more like my body, instead of looking at influencers that are definitely not going to look like, what they're wearing is not going to look like that on me. So sort of, again, this management of expectations around what I'm supposed to look like, and also what do I like that I can put together on a body like mine.
Mhm. And if fashion just doesn't interest you, just it will do. Finding something that you can say it will do and noticing where that pressure's coming from. Because if there's a pressure to dress up in a certain way, but you never enjoy dressing up in that way, maybe that's just not your thing. To find something it fits, it's comfortable enough, and it will do. I think for me anyways, sometimes if I can just find the right dress or the right top, then I will feel completely different about my body and in my body. And if you think about it, every time I was thinking about this not that long ago, every time, let's say I'm going to a bigger event or something, and I think, right, I want a new outfit. In theory, that is a lot of pressure because you are going out and hoping to find something that is better than everything else you own. Like, what's the chances of that when you really think about it?
It's also knowing yourself, right? Knowing when it's time to say this is good enough, and when having something that you do see that is like, oh no, this helps when I put myself together in such a way, like it does make me feel good. And there's times I need both, right? There's times where I'm like, I want to wear something colorful. I think it will make me feel like I'm allowed to take up more space. And there's other times where I'm like, I can't find that right thing. I just need to be okay with, like, what did you say? You didn't say good enough. You said
It'll do.
it'll do. I like that a lot. And it's kind of just knowing where you are, and this will change, day to day, year to year. Keeping those things in mind and knowing which balance of which you need.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's not a party, but we do have a gathering. But I know we've already mentioned. We can just keep mentioning it.
Mention it again.
Yeah, we're going to mention it over and over again. Come and join us at the end of January on the 28th, please.
I don't even know what I'm going to wear. Now I'm thinking about it.
I know. I was thinking that too. What are we going to wear?
I
Can we
think
wear matching?
Oh, is that inviting comparison?
Oh.
We'll have to, maybe we'll wear our colors. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be, it's interesting thinking about this and knowing that there's going to be people coming from all different places of it'll do and what do I wear and do I want something, I think everyone will be well represented.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. See you next time, everyone. Thanks for being here.